You put on a mask this morning. You probably don't even remember doing it. It happens somewhere between waking up and checking your phone, between getting dressed and stepping out the door. You became the version of yourself that the world expects to see. The professional, the good friend, the responsible adult, the person who has it all together. And somewhere in that transition, the real you disappeared. The scary part? You've been wearing this mask for so long that you can't remember what your actual face looks like anymore. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world. And according to Jung, having a persona isn't the problem. We need one to function in society. The problem is when we forget we're wearing it. When we become so identified with the role we play that we lose touch with who we actually are underneath. When the mask stops being something we put on and becomes who we think we are. This is one of the most common forms of psychological suffering in modern life. And most people don't even realize it's happening. They just feel empty, disconnected, like they're going through the motions of a life that doesn't actually feel like theirs. Today, we're going deep into the psychology of the persona, because if you don't understand how this works, you'll spend your entire life performing a character while your real self slowly suffocates in the dark. Let's start with what Jung actually meant by the persona. The word comes from ancient theater. It literally means the mask the actors wore on stage to show which character they were playing. And Jung chose this word intentionally because that's exactly what we do. We put on different masks depending on the role we're playing at any given moment. You have a work persona, a family persona, a friend persona, maybe a romantic persona. Each one is a version of you that's been carefully crafted to fit the situation, to meet expectations, to get approval, to avoid conflict, to survive. And this is normal. This is necessary. You can't walk into a job interview acting the same way you act with your best friend at 2 a.m. You can't show up to a funeral with the same energy you bring to a party. We adapt. We adjust. We present different versions of ourselves based on context. Jung understood this. He said the persona is a compromise between who you are and what society needs you to be. It's how you interface with the external world. It's your social operating system. When it's working properly, the persona is flexible. It's something you can put on and take off. You know, you're playing a role. You're conscious of the fact that your work self isn't your whole self. That the face you show your parents isn't the complete picture. That the version of you on social media is curated, edited, performed. But here's where it gets dangerous. Jung noticed that most people don't maintain that awareness. Most people start to believe the persona is who they really are. They identify with the mask. They become the role. The doctor who can't stop being a doctor even at home. The mother who loses all sense of identity outside of motherhood. The successful business person who has no idea who they are when they're not working. The good child who's still performing for their parents at 40 years old. Jung said this is one of the primary sources of psychological problems. When you identify with your persona, you lose access to your actual self. You become what he called a shell. All surface, no depth. All performance, no authenticity. And the really insidious thing about this is that the world rewards you for it. Society loves a good persona. It loves people who play their roles well, who stay in their lane, who meet expectations, who don't make waves. You get praise for being professional, for being responsible, for being agreeable, for being whatever it is that your particular role demands. So you keep doing it, you keep performing. You keep being the version of yourself that gets the best response. And slowly, without even noticing, the performance becomes permanent. The mask merges with your skin, and you forget what your actual face looked like. So how does this happen? How do we go from consciously playing a role to completely identifying with it? It starts early, way earlier than most people realize. As children, we learn very quickly which versions of ourselves are acceptable and which aren't, which behaviors get us love and which get us rejection, which parts of our personality are praised and which are punished. And we're not stupid. We adapt. We figure out what our parents want, what our teachers want, what our peers want, and we become that. We create a persona that maximizes approval and minimizes pain. Maybe you learned that being quiet and obedient made you the good child. So you buried your wildness, your anger, your need to take up space. You created a persona of compliance. Or maybe you learned that being funny kept people from seeing your pain. So you became the class clown. The one who's always on, always entertaining, never vulnerable. That became your mask. Or maybe you learned that achievement was the only thing that got you attention. So you became the perfect student, the overachiever, the one who never fails because failure means becoming invisible. These personas start as survival strategies, as ways to get our needs met in environments where being our full selves wasn't safe or wasn't valued. And they work. That's the problem. They work so well that we keep using them long after we've left those original environments. You're not living with your critical parents anymore, but you're still performing the role of the perfect child. You're not trying to fit in with high school bullies anymore, but you're still hiding the parts of yourself that made you a target. You're not competing for your father's approval anymore, but you're still achieving because that's the only way you know how to feel valuable. The persona becomes automatic, unconscious. You don't even realize you're doing it. It's just who you are now, except it's not. And deep down, some part of you knows that. That's where the emptiness comes from. That feeling of going through the motions, of living someone else's life, of being successful by all external measures, but feeling hollow inside. Jung said that when you over-identify with your persona, you become inflated. You start to believe you actually are this perfect, controlled, acceptable version of yourself. And anything that doesn't fit that image gets pushed into the shadow. Your anger, your neediness, your sexuality, your messiances, your failure, your darkness. All of it goes underground because it doesn't match the mask. And the more you identify with the persona, the more rigid it becomes, the less flexible, the less you're able to adapt or change or grow. Because growth would mean admitting that the persona isn't the whole truth, that there are parts of you that you've been denying. And here's what makes this even more complicated. Different environments demand different personas. Your work demands professionalism. Your family demands a certain role, maybe the reliable one, the successful one, the one who has it together. Your relationship demands romance or partnership or whatever dynamic you've established. Your friends expect a certain version of you. So you end up juggling all these different masks, switching between them constantly, and in all that switching, where is the actual you? Who are you when you're not performing any role? Most people can't answer that question because they're never not performing. Even when they're alone, they're still being the version of themselves they think they should be, still living up to some internalized expectation, still wearing the mask. So what's the actual cost of this? What happens when you spend your entire life identified with your persona? First, you lose access to your authentic emotions. Because your persona has certain emotions that are acceptable and others that aren't. If your persona is the calm professional, it can't be angry or overwhelmed or falling apart. If your persona is the strong one, you can't be vulnerable or scared or asking for help. If your persona is the positive one, you can't be depressed or cynical or exhausted. So you suppress, you perform, you keep smiling when you want to scream. You keep agreeing when you want to say no. You keep functioning when you're barely holding it together. Second, you become disconnected from your actual desires because the persona has goals that might not align with what you really want. Your persona wants the promotion because that fits the successful professional role. But maybe you actually want to quit your job and do something completely different. Your persona wants the relationship that looks good on paper. But maybe you're not actually happy. Your persona wants to maintain the image of having it all together. But maybe you need to fall apart. You end up living a life that looks right from the outside, but feels wrong on the inside. And you can't even articulate why because you've been so disconnected from your actual wants for so long that you don't know what they are anymore. Third, your relationships become performances. Because if you're always wearing a mask, you're never actually being seen. People are relating to your persona, not to you. They love the version of you that you've carefully constructed. The funny one, the successful one, the caretaker, the rock. But they don't know the real you because you don't show them. You can't. because showing them would mean dropping the mask. And dropping the mask feels terrifying because the mask is all you think you are. So you end up feeling lonely even in relationships, surrounded by people but completely unseen, known by everyone but understood by no one. Fourth, you become rigid and brittle, because maintaining a persona takes enormous energy. It's exhausting to constantly monitor yourself to make sure you're saying the right thing, doing the right thing, being the right version of yourself. And the more energy you put into maintaining the mask, the less flexible you become. You can't adapt to change because change would require adjusting the persona. You can't handle unexpected situations because your persona only works in specific context. You can't grow because growth would mean admitting the persona isn't complete. So you stay stuck, playing the same role, living the same patterns, year after year after year. And fifth, you develop what Jung called a compensatory shadow. All those parts of yourself that don't fit the persona, they don't just disappear. They go into the unconscious. They become the shadow. And the shadow doesn't stay quiet. It leaks out. It shows up in your dreams, in your projections onto others, in the things that trigger you, in your self-sabotage, in those moments where you act completely out of character and shock yourself. That's your shadow breaking through, trying to remind you that you're more than just the mask, that there are parts of you that have been buried alive and are demanding to be acknowledged. Eventually, for most people, something happens that shatters the persona. Jung called this the breakdown of the persona. And he said it's actually a crucial moment in psychological development. Even though it feels like everything is falling apart, it's the beginning of actually becoming whole. The breakdown can happen in different ways. Sometimes it's a major life event. You lose your job and suddenly the successful professional persona doesn't work anymore. You get divorced and the perfect partner persona crumbles. Your kids grow up and leave and you realize you don't know who you are outside of being a parent. Someone close to you dies and it forces you to confront your own mortality and question whether you've been living authentically. Sometimes it's not a single event. It's just an accumulating sense that something is wrong. You wake up one day and realize you don't recognize your own life. You've been so busy performing that you forgot to actually live. You've achieved everything you were supposed to achieve, and you feel nothing. You're surrounded by people and completely alone. You're doing everything right and it all feels meaningless. This is what people call a midlife crisis. But it's not really about age. It's about the persona finally cracking under its own weight. And when the persona breaks down, it's chaos. Because the persona was how you organized your identity. It was the structure, the story you told yourself about who you are. And now that structure is gone. You don't know who you are anymore. You question everything. Your career, your relationships, your values, your entire life up to this point. Jung said this is terrifying but necessary. Because you can't become your authentic self while you're still identified with the mask. The mask has to break. The false self has to die. So the real self can finally emerge. So how do you actually do this? How do you separate from the persona without completely falling apart? First, you have to recognize that you've been wearing a mask. That seems obvious, but most people don't see it. They think their persona is just who they are. So start paying attention. Notice when you're performing. Notice when you're adjusting yourself based on who's around. Notice the difference between how you act at work versus with close friends versus alone. Notice the gap between what you're showing and what you're feeling. That gap is where the persona lives. Second, you have to start questioning the roles you play. Ask yourself why you play them. Where did this persona come from? Who taught you that this is who you need to be? What are you getting from maintaining this mask? What are you afraid will happen if you drop it? These aren't easy questions, because the answers often go back to childhood wounds and learned patterns and deep fears about not being acceptable as you are. But asking the questions is how you start to separate your identity from the role. Third, you need to start expressing the parts of yourself that don't fit the persona. This is shadow work. This is bringing back all the stuff you exiled because it didn't match the mask. Your anger if you've been playing nice. Your vulnerability if you've been playing strong. Your needs if you've been playing self-sufficient. Your weirdness if you've been playing normal. Start small. Find safe spaces to let these parts out. Therapy, journaling, trusted friends. Gradually expand. Let people see more of you. The real you, the messy, complicated, contradictory you. Fourth, you have to learn to tolerate other people's reactions when you stop performing. Because when you drop the persona, people are going to be confused, uncomfortable, maybe even angry. They like the version of you they knew. They're used to you playing that role. And now you're changing the rules. Some people will adjust. Some won't. You might lose relationships that were only based on your persona, and that's painful. But staying in a performance to keep people comfortable is how you lose yourself permanently. Fifth, you need to develop what Jung called a flexible persona. This doesn't mean you never wear a mask. It means you wear it consciously. You know when you're adapting to a situation and when you're being authentic. You can play different roles without believing you are those roles. You maintain awareness of who you are underneath all the performances. You have a solid sense of self that doesn't change based on context. This is the goal, not to destroy the persona, but to stop being identified with it, to know the difference between the mask in your face. And finally, you have to be willing to live with not knowing exactly who you are, because once you separate from the persona, there's a period of uncertainty, of exploration, of trying on different versions of yourself to see what actually fits versus what you thought you were supposed to be. Jung called this individuation. It's the process of becoming your actual self instead of the self you constructed to survive. It's messy, it's uncomfortable. It requires you to sit with ambiguity and change and the terrifying freedom of not having a script to follow. But on the other side of that discomfort is something most people never experience: authenticity, wholeness, the ability to be the same person in every room. The freedom to stop performing and start living. The relief of finally being seen for who you actually are. Not the mask, not the role, not the carefully constructed persona, just you. Raw, real, and perfect, complete, that's worth the breakdown. That's worth the fear. That's worth risking the comfortable life you built around a lie. Because living as a mask is not living at all. It's just a very convincing performance of life, and you deserve more than that. You deserve to remember what your face looks like. Subscribe for more psychology that helps you actually understand yourself.